I like America. I say, can you see? I say, can you see? I say.
Accordingly, I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators.
Hold on. Did you get that? You need first to understand the petrodollar system. The petrodollar system means that oil around the world is traded in US dollars, no matter who's buying it or selling it. So, whether Japan buys oil from Saudi Arabia or France buys from Iraq, they pay in US dollars, not their own currencies. Which kind of makes you wonder, how did the dollar end up in the middle of every oil deal on the planet? Back in the 1960s, the United States was spending way more money than it had, mainly because of the Vietnam War and expensive domestic programs like the Lyndon B. Johnson administration's Great Society. But instead of raising taxes enough to cover it, the government just printed more money to pay the bills. The problem? There wasn't enough gold to back all those extra dollars, so other countries started losing trust and began trading their dollars for gold. And that started draining US gold reserves fast. So in 1971, President Richard Nixon made a drastic move. He cut the link between the dollar and gold. And just like that, the system collapsed. Which meant the US now needed a new way to keep global demand for its currency. But why does it really matter? Before we get into what the US actually did, we need to understand why it needs global demand for its currency in the first place. One of the biggest advantages of a strong dollar is that it makes imports cheaper. When the dollar is strong, Americans can buy foreign goods for less money, which helps keep inflation low and increases purchasing power. But there's something even more important. When the dollar is used all over the world, the US can actually print more money with fewer immediate consequences. In fact, we actually talked about that in a previous video on the channel. That's because the dollar isn't just used in the US, it's used globally. So when more dollars are created, the impact doesn't stay in one place. Other countries end up holding and using those dollars, which means part of the inflation pressure gets spread out across the world instead of being fully absorbed at home. So, back to the story. In 1973, the oil crisis hit when Arab countries cut oil exports to the United States and its allies to pressure them over their support for Israel. So in 1974, the US reached a deal with Saudi Arabia that tied oil trade to the US dollar, and in return, the US provided military protection. From there, the system gradually expanded to other members of OPEC. So now, if a country needs oil for things like fueling cars, ships, and planes, transporting people and goods, or even producing plastics and everyday products, they first need to get US dollars. So how does the system work today? Here's the loop. Countries need oil to run their economies, so they first need US dollars to buy it, which means they have to earn dollars by selling goods or holding dollar reserves. Then, they use those dollars to purchase oil from producers like Saudi Arabia. And those oil producers don't keep the money idle. They send it back into the system by investing in US banks and buying US government bonds. And this brings the dollars back into the US financial system, completing a loop that keeps global demand for the dollar going all the time. But what does the US actually gain from this petrodollar system? First, it helps keep the dollar strong, which, as we explained, lowers inflation and increases Americans' purchasing power. But there's more than that. It also lets the US borrow money very cheaply. Because when countries take their oil earnings and invest them in US government bonds, they create huge demand for it. We've also explained that in another video. And when demand is high, the US doesn't need to offer high interest rates to attract lenders. On top of that, it gives the US serious geopolitical power. Since a large part of global trade goes through the dollar system, the US can influence international finance and even use sanctions effectively when needed. The system is powerful, but not untouchable. Some countries, like China, have started pushing for oil and energy trades in their own currency, the yuan, especially in deals with Russia and some Middle Eastern partners. Russia has also been selling parts of its oil and gas in ruble instead of relying only on the US dollar. And in some cases, countries like Iran and Venezuela have tried to bypass the dollar system entirely because of sanctions. So yeah. Turns out geopolitics isn't just for world leaders and economists. You've been part of it every time you pay for gas. Congrats.